Good evening, everyone. I'm John OLoughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And tonight, it's Thursday night, and you know what that means. It's time for the Thursday Trio. And the Thursday Trio tonight, as usual, is George Webb and Professor Hamamoto. Good evening, George. Good evening, Professor. And good evening to everyone in the chat room and watching at home. And wow.
Good evening.
I never know who's going to start, but I feel like... isn't it George's turn? I can't remember.
I think it is, yeah.
Well, I'll throw it over to Dr. Hamamoto because we're on to a story that his friend Yoichi Shimatsu we're in complete alignment about where this bioweapon was worked on to gain of function stuff.
Yeah.
At the University of Wisconsin. And I thought, man, that's the way to lead the show, because they also have a sister program in Rotterdam at the Erasmus Institute. So I'll let you take it from there.
Well, George, not coincidentally, that was number one on my list here. The story of Professor Yoshiharu Kawaoka is his name. Kawaoka is his last name, K-A-W-A-O-K-A, in case you wanted to look it up. And we talked briefly yesterday, George, and I immediately got on the horn to Yoichi Shimatsu, and we had about a half an hour conversation about the situation. So it's fresh in my mind, but I also put down some notes so that I do not inadvertently libel anybody. This has all been published, and it's been written about by Yoichi Shimatsu. And for those of you who want to look at the articles, George mentioned this the other day, go to rense.com. And Yoichi has a 28-part series. This really ought to be a book, but he's so busy he doesn't have time to really go through it and edit it and put it together. But he has a 28-part series that, not coincidentally, because we have two world-class researchers and journalists here, George Webb and Yoichi Shimatsu. Not coincidentally, they've come to very, very similar conclusions independently of each other. So what does that tell you? This is not a coincidence. And it reinforces what George has been telling us for almost a year now. I'm reckoning that from March as being sort of the beginnings of this crisis. So we're moving up on the anniversary. Very briefly, before I throw it back to George and John, who is Yoshiharu Kawaoka? He was well, he still is, as far as I know, at the University of Wisconsin, and it's one of those land grant institutions, right? Remember, I keep talking about that? That's where the action is. We're looking at AI and enhanced reality and IT and all that, all the glamorous areas, but let's get, stick with the basics here: veterinary science, agriculture. And he studied, and this is the key here, he studied with Professor Gary Splitter, S.P. Great job, Andy. Gary Splitter, S-P-L-I-T-T-E-R. And I just looked at his website prior to going on air. And this is fresh information. He's still with the department, get this, at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Department of Pathobiological Sciences. Department of Pathobiological Sciences. So, as you know the history, most of the people here are very well up to speed on the literature, thanks to John's readings and discussions and interviews. You know about the backstory of Kaiser Wilhelm Gesellschaft and the other related institutions, Cold Spring Harbor, and so on. So I won't review that. So Gary Splitter was the doctoral advisor, the PhD advisor of Kawaoka in the Department of Pathobiological Sciences, and here again, the School of Veterinary Medicine. Again, look at your veterinary science. That's where the action is. And here's the kicker. It is Splitter and Kawaoka who are credited with, according to Yoichi Shimatsu. So if you have any problems with this identification, go to Yoichi's articles. But it's these two who are responsible for the gain of function research.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
Quickly, there's an interesting backstory here. There's, and some of you may remember this reading a few years ago, but a frozen solid corpse of supposedly a Native American. It wasn't Eskimo. That was a false story. But an indigenous person was found in permafrost. And this person had died of the 1918 Spanish influenza epidemic. And so the virus was locked in there. These characters got, or Gary Splitter did, got the tissue and was able to reconstitute it for who knows what. And so that's where he first came to prominence. And according to Yoichi, and I'll pass it back to George right after this, according to Yoichi, just to let the University of Wisconsin not off the hook, because they're ultimately responsible, but Gary Splitter was doing this, and this is Shimatsu, not me, so don't sue me, but they were doing research off the books. There's no record of it, and they're doing it night after hours, and it wasn't part of the approved protocol that all research institutions are supposed to go through. That's according to Yoichi. So that's the dark backside of this gain of function research that George has been walking us through. And then later on, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Capitol military coup d'etat, because I have some information there that I wanted to hear. George?
Yeah, I'm the most honored person in the world, agreeing with Yuichi Shimatsu. I mean, it's like he's Japan Times for 2 decades. You know, he's the biggest journalist in Japan by save none. So the fact that we kind of got there, and I must admit, he was out there first on Rents.com, and I did a lot of shows with Jeff Rents, and I have tremendous respect for Jeff as well. But I was coming at it from Europe and the NATO side, and I was coming at it from the Rotterdam lab and sort of the Fort Detrick of NATO. This is the Fort Detrick of NATO, and so I've been following this. And here's, Chris Stevens is flying this around North Africa, these materials with Carter Page as the weapons officer and everything. And I'm very into the NATO. Where do they use it in Libya? And where do they use it in Syria and all this? And it tracks me back to the sister organization that's doing gain of function. There's this guy named Fauchier, the French version of Fauci, right? And it tracks back. It tracks back to the University of Wisconsin. And I'm sitting there with Eddie going, "Hey, that's funny. That's where you went for 4 years." And we got down to the, Mr. Kawa OKA, and I did a Google search on Kawa OKA, and up comes Yoichi Shimatsu, Rents.com. I about fell off my chair. I said, "Addie, there he is. Addie, you're going back home, brother. You're not going to Florida." And we bought the ticket yesterday, and he's going back. The other thing Yoichi wrote was, you may remember that there was a cruise ship, about 300 people that was affected in Japan.
Yes.
And he writes about that. He also writes that they found out about this. The warnings for gain of function, because it's really bioweapons development, have been going on since 2012 by all the major scientific journals.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing making this an airborne virus? It's bad enough if it touches, it can transmit, but you're making it airborne? Are you kidding? I mean, basically far increasing the potential death plume of the bioweapon. And so that's scary. And you have Scientific America, National Academy of Sciences, all these scientific journals saying this is crazy stuff. And this is what leads Obama into 2013 doing the ban, 2015, excuse me, and for the scientific journals. And then they move it off site to Rotterdam, to this off-site place here in NATO with this Erasmus lab. And then Yoichi, and I didn't know this part, said that they secretly also moved it to the University of Tokyo, and some university on an island, on some island. It reminded me so much of Mark Kulak talking about Plum Island. And I'm like, oh my God, and he starts talking about Unit 731. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh my, this is the German side. The Rotterdam guys are the German IG Farben portfolio of bioweapons, and this guy is the Unit 731 Japanese, and it's all coming together at Fort Detrick. or the proxies for Fort Detrick. So it really is, it's been an incredible 24 hours for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And what it does is to throw off the dominant, the mainstream, as well as a lot of people in independent news talking about the Chacoms being responsible exclusively, or even President Trump would call it the China virus, right?
Yeah.
And either he's misinformed or I'm talking about the President of the United States. He's the commander in chief. He should be read into all this, the information there, or there's a deliberate attempt to divert attention from the domestic origins of this aerosolized, these airborne viruses, and what, who knows what's being planned for them, right? Some sort of accident, false flag. Is this going to be the 9/11 of the 21st century? I mean, one's imagination runs wild there. But we do know that the research has been done, and that these weapon systems are at the ready. And as I've been speaking about for the past few months, most of this has been workshopped through games, through toys. It's the game. It's the Super Soaker, right? The person who invented the quote unquote toy Super Soaker was with the U.S. Air Force. At least he's the guy that they credited it with. And we talk about the Legos. We talk about these biospheric atmospheres, as in the ant farm, right? These cryptogenesis, the shrimps, right? The sea monkeys. Okay, these are all sort of fun time expressions of a larger underlying agenda that's being prepared for us, and it's really all kind of coming together, and it manifests itself in the Clockwork Orange exercise. George Webb was there with 18 of his colleagues, all the way live on January 6, 2021, when he saw the tip of the spear, the Mercs, Azov Army, right there.
Yeah, I just talked to John. Jump in here if I don't mean to step on your line if you want to get in, but yeah, I just talked to Jeff Prather, and he called me, and I was standing there with Eddie, and he said, "Hey, are you still? I mean, I heard you talking about Proud Boys. Are you backing away from the Ukrainian Mercs? Going through first?" And I go, no. They just cut the edit. They edit that when the Proud Boys go by me. But before that, I was looking at my footage from the Ukrainian guys going through, and we went back and looked at the tape over and over. They're yelling forward in Russian. They're yelling "do it faster" in Russian. They're yelling all these commands in Russian, and then they drift away after all the windows are broken. And then people, and plus they're cordoned off, so you can't see who's breaking the windows. So when the people walk up, we had a guy on our show the other day saying people were running out saying, "Oh my gosh, my eyes, help. There's somebody in there that needs help." And people were being lured in thinking that they were going to be doing emergency medical procedures. So this thing is as rotten as you can get, as far as a false flag.
Absolutely. And if these individuals, the Ukrainian Mercs and other dupes that followed suit there, if they could be considered to be the so-called tip of the spear, okay, what is the handle? What is the shaft that we the American people got the shaft, but where is this coming from? Well, I did some research, and I saw that great footage on your channel, George, of the Mercs going, they had the body armor, the helmets, and the beanies, and the military type style shoes, right? All of that's there, and with the 2x4, I saw that it's all there. Where did this come from? And here we're coming full circle. I came across a book, and I was trying to send it to you, George, the other day, but the file's too big to be sent as an attachment. But I have the book here. It's a ebook. And it's titled Zones of Control, right? This term zones keeps coming up, whether it's a temporary autonomous zone or it's zones such as Washington, D.C. There are these special administrative zones where the New World Order has its own set of laws and rules and sovereignty, which is, I think, based upon maritime law, right? It's a maritime situation here. It's not American law here. Washington, D.C., City of London, Tokyo, these are all, and Beijing, these are all special globalist autonomous zones, if you want to call it. So here's the title. It's quite telling. Zones of Control. And here is the tell right here. The subtitle is Perspectives on Wargaming. And it's all here. It talks about, because you were talking about what the Defense Threat Reduction Center. Okay, where are they getting their basic R&D? Well, you know what's coming out of, from what I found? MIT. Yeah, they're devoted to wargaming, and they have all the not just academics, but people in the military who have a whole anthology here. And this is going to be very useful in the article, if you're still interested, that we're going to produce for the Columbia Journalism Review, and say, here it is. Here's the academic research. Here's the backstory. Here's the footage. Here's the reportage. Here's the history going back to Unit 731 and the Erasmus Institute. We dare you to publish this contra Donnie O'Sullivan in CNN or the Washington Compost or the New York Times. You are supposed to be the watchdog of journalism in America, the estimable Columbia Journalism Review. We dare you to publish this research talking about how it actually went down, how the report should read. Thank you, George.
Yeah.
Service, and John.
John, do you want to make a comment at this point, or you want me to? I can sail on if you want me to.
You guys are covering this area, and very few people are covering it. So I like to hear you guys talk about it. Continue. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I just want to say that, that the fact the MIT and Vannevar Bush, going all the way back to him, getting all these war patents and then farming them back out through their proxies for everything from radar and Raytheon to the stealth technology for fighters with Lockheed. I mean, it gave birth to all our major, MIT gave birth to all of our major new technology after World War II. And so wargaming doesn't surprise me that would be thrown in. And down at the National Defense University, Addie and I, again, we're talking about him going back into the winter. It's cold up there in the north. And he goes, I'm going back to dark winter. And I said, oh, that's another war game at National Defense University at down by Fort McNair on the Potomac, where Jim Woolsey of the CIA war gamed coronavirus in 2002. Mm-hmm. So these war games, you're so correct. They presage it happening in real life. They don't war game it just so, hey, that was fun. No, they're preparing to do it. And the other thing that Yoichi said, and I mean, when I was reading, I just read 1 of 5, and he was saying that they had sprayed bioweapon and killed half the pork livestock in China, in the Yangtze Valley, in order to get their infrastructure projects through. He didn't say Belt and Road, but he did say, on the Yangtze, the Three Gorges. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious, I got to read this whole thing. And so I'm going to put, Addie on just reading the Jeff Rentz, Yoichi Shimatsu stuff, and have a report every day for, I think it's going to keep us busy for 10 days. It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah, I've been reading some chatter on the mainstream news as well as some of the journals, and my prediction is that the pork situation here in America, that's going to be attacked here. They already have these gangsters, these groups that are purposely sending drones with vectors in them, viruses probably, to decimate these pig stocks for extortion purposes. So that's for the criminal part of it. But as I've been saying all along, that's why I'm interested in ag schools and schools of veterinary medicine and all that. Is that my read of the situation is that the human population has been about pushed as far to the wall as possible. So now they're going to go to the livestock. Now they're going to go to the food sources. And heaven forbid, and I'll say this, but I think the last straw will be when they go for domestic animals, pets, household pets. I don't think they're beyond that. But that's their ace in the hole right there. So yeah.
I just want to do a quick tip of the hat to task force, because this is what she believed. She said, George, you got it all wrong. It's not uranium. That's Columbus, Ohio. That's Piketon. They moved the trucking to Fort Detrick. It's bioweapons. And the Saipov truckers that they're bringing in on the Blackstone Express, and they're all going down to Salisbury, Maryland, 5 hours away, where there's all these transportation workers. And there's this huge chicken farm with Mr. CIA Purdue chickens, who's Nancy Pelosi's dad's partner, going all the way back to the Port of Baltimore. I mean, they're amplifying whatever they're doing at Fort Detrick and in chickens, or in the coronavirus case, I think they need to do it in pork. They can't. It's too fragile for chickens. And then the TWIC, they're loading it up. They're putting it on the boat. And one day the boat's going to come in back to us. And, the way that Washington, D.C. is locked down, I just fear that it's going to be sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. Now, so there's the offensive attack against the human population and the animal population. We know about the plants. Okay, that's the offensive attack, but it's a twin process. It's a dual-fold process here. The other aspect of this project here that's been war gamed at places like MIT is to provide the entry point for what these people call, this is the phrase that I've been reading in all the journals, which are largely subsidized by DARPA and the DOD. The researchers go where the money is. So they say, you're going to write about this and you're going to help us war game this. The phrase that I came up with recently, they call it syndromic biosurveillance. So this is going to be the opportunity to push us, because people keep talking about the microchips and RFID. Yeah, I'm sure that's it. But it's within a larger framework of 24/7 syndromic biosurveillance into eternity. That is where it's heading, unless the American people intervene.
Yeah, if you mean, we're not going to do any medicine anymore until you take the coronavirus first. If their cough is a symptom or sneezing is a symptom, therefore we're going to force you to take the test as a hurdle to medical care. And then once you do that, then you have this capability to say there's these autonomous zones for vaccine zones. Mm-hmm. Schools, obviously, universities, government workplaces first, airports. You might even extend it to hotels and other public places. And pretty soon, it's so uncomfortable. You can't even go to Walmart to not get the vaccine. You eventually break down and get the vaccine. And then you basically are on their track. You're like a Monsanto seed at that point. You're in their patent world. So you need to rely on their vaccines from then on. You're part of their seed corn once you get in. I'm pro-vax if it's tested and it's proven effective over time without a lot of side effects. Like there's a drug that starts with H with 2 more letters that you can't say on it. Mm-hmm. It worked for 60 years. They gave it to pregnant women, and that was okay to say it up until just last year. And now you can't say it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, once you get these genetically modified organisms into your your genetic framework, right? Or the mRNA, which is not a V word, it's a genetic weapon, right? Once you've done that courtesy of Monsanto or these other entities, then you are a genetically modified organism, right? Maybe you are now not even human. You are a transhuman, and maybe you are not protected by constitutional guarantees because you're no longer a citizen. You're not even a humanoid. You are a genetically re-engineered entity, which they own. They patented it, and this already has a precedent. Professor Chapela, who is the University of California geneticist, I think he's a biologist by training, who had a huge grant to study maize in Mexico, right? And corn in Mexico is constitutionally protected. It has to be organic, and they don't allow Monsanto in there. But he found out that they introduced it to the crops surreptitiously, and they have the patent on it. They own you now through the introduction of these genetically modified organisms. That's the workaround. We don't have to even think about, oh, it's the Second Amendment right, the First Amendment, the Constitution. That's rendered irrelevant. You are now a patented entity owned by the corporatists. Beautiful. Who war game? Who thinks of these scenarios?
It's very Nazi. I know John read Seeds of Destruction with William Engdahl, and this was all laid out in his book.
Absolutely. And we're getting to 1 hour, to the full biosurveillance grid being put in there. Let me just give you an example of how pervasive this is, because I read all the academic literature here, or most of it. This is a conference. This is where all the brainstorming goes. And I by the way, I also think these academic conferences are the way to pass information face to face, so they don't have to go through the BlackBerry, right? They can just do this under pretext, and it's no coincidence that Belgrade is a destination point for a lot of these world academic conferences for this type of work here. But this is at a conference 2014 ISDS. I don't know what that stands for, but the title of this particular paper that's presented to their peers is the Global Biosurveillance Portal, subtitled Biosurveillance for the Department of Defense, the U.S. And these 4 people, co-authors of this paper at a conference, they're with, guess what? Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical and Biological Defense, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, USA. So it's total military. And that holds true of what we saw on January 6, 2021, NATO takeover. We're under military occupation, and they're doing it under the auspices of maritime law because of these zones, DC, City of London, right? Those are the true autonomous zones that go beyond national sovereignty. And the second one is this transgenic abrogation of the US Constitution. It was done militarily and also through genetic engineering, stealthily, right under our noses. While we were laughing at Trigglypuff and all the social justice warriors and calling them names, libtards and all, this is what was really taking place.
Wow. I think this is so the analogy of the Monsanto wing of humans is just a whole bunch to take into a one grasp. But I want to pivot a little bit using this idea of biosurveillance. And I want to tell a little story from John's dad's experience. And it revolves around a clock. You were speaking of Clockwork Orange that they put into the U.S. Embassy. And what it did was it used passive elements, no batteries whatsoever. And it somehow was getting the conversations, surveilling the conversations happening inside the embassy. And they finally figured it out, that there was a millimeter wave technology that was vibrating these things. And then so the passive elements then were becoming active, and then they had a frequency of their own.
Yeah.
Sort of like charging a battery, wirelessly. And I immediately thought of Lena Poo talking about if you could, like the research that the Harvard guy was doing, if you could have in a bio tattoo or some kind of vaccine injury where you had something that could be resonated and you did pass somebody through an airport detector, millimeter wave, it would glow for a while. And it's just a matter of keep charging them, if you will, and you have round the clock biosurveillance. I thought that was, Lena's been talking about this forever.
Yeah.
And it's actually it was going back to the Cold War. The Russians were using it as far as listening devices 60 years ago.
Yeah, and the Soviets have been really leading the way in that technology, EMF research, and we call it generically mind control, but but it was really these millimeter waves that they were experimenting on. And I think you're referencing that situation of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, right?
Yes.
There was a painting up there, or an escutcheon, or a metal medallion, and it worked like
it was a seal. Yeah, it was
a seal. Yeah, with the eagle, the American eagle.
Yeah.
And it worked as a radiator, like a passive radiator, like a speaker, like a microphone principle. Yeah. But you need something to stimulate it. In a regular speaker, it's electromagnetic. It's it goes in and out the speaker. But I think you're right. I think it was millimeter waves that were doing it. That's why it could be so small.
Yeah.
And they got everything. They got all the intel they needed.
1,000 megahertz or 1 gigahertz, millimeter.
Right.
Yeah. And so that leads me back to this book, if I may be so bold as to make a transition here to Mole Hunt.
Yes.
I just want to bring everybody up to speed on why this is in that book. This story about that passive wave transmitter is in that book. There it is. There's Mole.
I got my copy a couple days ago.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Used. It's only available used.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the good news here is David Wise writes about John's dad in another one of his books called Operation Shocker. And in this book, one of his nemesis is described, Angleton, early on. And one of Angleton's maybe guys to defame a Russian who says that actually Oswald was an FBI informant and not a Russian KGB agent, a guy named Nosenko, and they put this other guy named Golitsyn in. So the book starts out with the Angleton's guide to smear the guy saying that Oswald was working actually with the FBI. Mm-hmm. And that's where this book starts. And then the next thing, at the end of the first chapter, when they introduce this Golitsyn, he says, and the spy's name, the mole inside the CIA's name, begins with the letter K. The letter K. And guess who has a name that starts with the letter K? Henry Kissinger. But that's not what Angleton wants. He knows it's Kissinger at the State, that's the one who's bringing all these white Russians in. Mm-hmm. So he starts going after different people. For the next 20 years, he goes after different people with the letter K. And a lot of people with the letter K name are fired out of fear. And then finally, William Colby fires James Angleton because he's been on this wild goose chase for 20 years. So that's where I am in the book. And I just thought I'd let everybody know that the clock story, the passive Lena Poo clock story, is in this book.
That book should be back into print with a new preface. Maybe you should write it, George, to bring it up to date. That's a really important one. David Weiss has also written on Chinese espionage in the U.S. He wrote one on Parlor Maid. And again, it's one of those situations where the FBI has these informants, and they have it's Valentine's Day, right? They have sex with the people they're supposedly, handling and all that. But this is from listening to you and John break it down. Really, what they're doing is passing on. They're just using them as conduits to pass on information and intel that belongs to U.S. corporations. They use these, and they're under the pretext of surveilling them or watching, guarding over them. Right? They're really just pass-throughs or conduits.
Well, the fun part, David. But the fun part of this one is that the FBI and the CIA are not on the same team yet. They're not one and the same with getting 2 checks from each one. So they're going at each other, which is still kind of fun. With whose Russian defector is the right Russian defector. And there's another little thing in the book. I'm just trying to get people to read the book because I think it's going to be good for when we go to New Orleans and so forth with Oswald. But the code system that the CIA used was a 2-letter code. And gosh, it seems a lot like McDuff as a very efficient way to file things. But anyway, AE, first 2 vowels in the English language, was what they used for Russian defectors. So it's AE cradle or AE ladle, excuse me. Golitsyn is AE ladle, like he's going to ladle a little bit more confusion every so often to throw people off the trail, AE ladle. Mm-hmm. And Nosenko, who he's saying is a bad guy, is AE Sniper, or his code name is Sniper. So that helps set it up, and I think we're going to have fun talking about it over the next because the roots of what we're talking about now with all these bioweapons is in this book, and it's also in the Operation Shocker book.
Mm-hmm. Now, I haven't read it. I've just cracked it open a little bit. But does George de Mohrenschildt come up?
Oh yeah, right away.
Right away.
I mean, straight out of the bat. And what's interesting is, Oswald stayed at George de Mohrenschildt's house when he went to Minsk. Okay, now George de Mohrenschildt's father.
Wait a minute. What? He stayed at de Mohrenschildt's house in Minsk?
Yes. That's why I keep saying that. Who would know that other than your dad, John? Who would know that Oswald was going to stay at de Mohrenschildt's house in Minsk?
I'm shocked. I didn't know that happened.
Yeah. And so what you say is you talked about this on your show the other day. This is all about the Baku. It's all about getting the Baku. And his dad owned all the oil. He was the czar's guy for all the oil. Well, you'll find out, and this is where Bill Taylor's research comes in, everybody in the FBI, in this counterintelligence division that's working this case is a white Russian. They all know de Mohrenschildt. They all know Daryavan. They all know Ignatieff. All the stuff Bill Taylor's been. Everybody that works for Angleton in the counterintelligence group they're all white Russians. Yeah, which really is interesting.
Let me just get a word in about the recent stuff I've been doing on George de Mohrenschildt. And as I was saying to Deborah Johnson today in the chat, this guy is real. I mean, he's real Russian nobility. His family is really very, very powerful under the Tsar, and his father was like the governor of Belarusia. Think of that in terms of today, of how NATO is pressing Belarusia through the Navalny case, right? Trying to stir up a revolution there, and that tells me that we have underestimated this Mohrenschildt guy and his entire family. They go back to the czars of the 19th century as extremely powerful nobility, governing a huge swath from Petersburg down to Minsk, just a huge amount of Russia, and totally intimate with the czars, Alexander, and then after that, Nicholas. And his father was imprisoned by the Bolsheviks for a couple of years and escapes. But when you try to figure out why was he involved in Lee Harvey Oswald, when you pull on that string, you can't help but run into the Rockefellers, because they're right in the middle of it. From one end to the other, you get back to Wall Street, the Rockefellers, Sullivan and Cromwell, the same actors that we are exposing as fast as we can to try to tell everybody, hey, World War I was a false flag set up. World War II was a arms deal, for the banks, and all of the horrible genocide and the grinding away of millions and millions and millions of human lives has all been for the banks. And that big story is told by people in books. You see it on a YouTube if you look for it, but it's not part of the mainstream conversation yet. And that brings me to my real concern tonight, is that what you're saying is really happening about the genetic modification of humanity. It's really happening right now. And our economy is being, turned into nothing but it could be the the legs pulled out from under it at any time by a small number of bankers that could just say, well, you know what, we're no longer going to put our value in the American dollar anymore. Let's move over to the, Bitcoin or the renminbi or, something else. But, this dollar, we've been sustaining it too long. Let's let it go. The only reason that they keep us going, I think, is because we do their bidding militarily. We sacrifice our lives and treasure for their interests all around the world, and we make the moral compromises, for them, so that we can we go out and do things to Afghanistan that, you'd be ashamed to mention what happened, and we know what happened in places like Abu Ghraib. But we're doing these things because we're enthralled by the economic system that the elites have imposed on us. But to put together this right now is the crossroads for humanity, and how can we possibly allow this to happen? I'm not throwing up my hands. I'm just saying, guys, what happened? The whole fall, the last 5-6 months, we've been working very, very hard to get President Trump reelected so as we could avoid this. Because we've thought, if he gets another term, that it'll be like John Kennedy getting another term, and he could finally confront these deep state horrors. But now we don't have that. This is where I'm coming out, and I'm actually very serious about this. It's what's called a jubilee. That government created corporations. Corporations did not create government. And they're just corporations or pieces of paper, and government can control this whole thing. Government is the ultimate power in the country, as long as we have people in positions of power in the government that are going to use that power for the good of the American people. The financial system has been so trashed by these folks that right now we are all just going to be victims unless we do something about it. And so my idea is to form a political party around the idea of complete and total debt forgiveness for everybody. Just, I don't care who you are. I don't care if if you're rich, if you're poor, if you've got a house, if you've got I don't care. Just quit owing money to people, because that will cut out all of the excessive interest and the money that goes to pay for borrowing the money, and then that's what cycles up and gets us into trouble, where there's so many people owe people money just because they had to borrow money to pay the note on their debt that they incurred a couple of years ago, and it just gets worse and worse. We are the only people that can stop it by forcing our Congress to take action to either rein in these banks, or we can just say, no, we're going to walk away from all of this debt. You guys are out of business, and we're starting over from scratch. Nobody owes anybody anything, and no court in this United States can, following the passage of this law, enforce a debt against an American citizen until, after say, if you buy a car in 2023, then sure, if you want to mortgage it, that's fine. But we got to stop these old debts that have just been piling up and piling up and piling up for 100 years or more. And that is the only thing I can think of that we could possibly have any power to say to the banks through our representatives, you guys have got to back down and let us breathe free and be Americans and be, free people again, and stop using all of these legal techniques like patents. I mean, patenting genes is stupid. We should never let anybody patent genes, and yet these people are patenting everything they can, as you just said, patenting procedures, patenting things that basically make it impossible for anybody to have their own business, their own thought. I think of a better way, a better mousetrap. Well, guess what? The process of thinking of a better mousetrap is probably patented too. So it's just too far. We've got to do something. Time for a jubilee.
Well, John, I think you hit the nail right on the head. The mousetrap gets sprung tomorrow. We have people in the comments saying that probably some of my footage will be shown in the Senate tomorrow. And we catch one mouse, we catch one Ukrainian mercenary that was also in the Maidan. We catch two of those mice. We don't need to catch a whole lot to totally destroy the narrative that you saw play out over the last 8 hours. John, thank you so much for being on the show with Farmer Jones. If you haven't seen that show where they go down point by point on how this thing should be thrown out. And John, I think you're right. It should be a jubilee of information that was citizen journalism sourced, and catch them in the mousetrap and hang the mice out for all the American people to see. We don't know if it's going to be there tomorrow. A lot of people in the chat are saying they know my footage is going to be in there tomorrow, our group's footage. We don't know that yet, but it's something to look forward to. Like you said, John, the mousetrap is set, and maybe it's the time for the bankers to catch a couple of bankers eating the cheese.
I'll tell you, on just to follow up on that, George, the charrette videos that I have, and they're still up on YouTube. I'm going to be taking them down very shortly because YouTube is rattling the saber at me. That if I do one more thing, they're going to, take me down. So just letting people know, the charrette videos on my channel are going to disappear in the next few days, and we're going to start taking down a lot of my work, especially with George, just because I'm going to move it over to screamingospreys.com. We're going to either have it on BitChute or Brighteon or somewhere else, so you can always find it, but from YouTube itself. But what I wanted to say about those videos is, if you watch them, you'll get the perfect sense of normal American people getting together, on the idea of, we support the president, make America great again. We're here to be there as a peaceful representative of those of us that are concerned that there was election fraud. And the videos, as you were in a lot of them, George, they show the development of the enthusiasm to go. And then when we got down there, and your reporting is all lined up right there within those videos. There's about 7 or 8 of them that we have in a playlist at screamingospreys.com. So again, that's another source that people can easily point to and just say, hey, look at this. It's right there. And that was the result of all the reporting that you and Addie and the gang did during the charrette. It was quite an amazing period of time. So yeah, let's expose it all. And there they are. There's the gang getting ready to go. There's Norman and Carol, Jay, and Janet, Tara, of course. And all right.
And that doesn't look like a violent bunch of people at all. As a matter of fact, none of those folks were violent in any way. They just went to really observe democracy, just like you would go visit the Capitol. They didn't even go over the gate. And these people are the ones being characterized as rioters. Siege of the Capitol. Do you see any pitchforks in their hand or anything? They're all in very great spirits. They're all about ready to get in the car and go and watch democracy in action. And unfortunately, they saw 4 psychological operations in action. They saw a FBI informant-laced Proud Boys in action. They didn't see the American process of democracy in action, unfortunately, because we couldn't afford that, because that would be telling the truth.
Now, George,
it is recorded, and I'm excited to see what happens tomorrow. Great.
George, in that brilliant interview that you had with 2 top flight attorneys, Farmer Jones and John OLoughlin, you had mentioned the DTRA, right? So it sent me scurrying to find some information there. And you said that this is the umbrella organization that is probably responsible for implementing or executing what we saw on January 6th. Is that a correct characterization? DTRA?
I know Peter Strzok came in the FBI through the back door. He did not go to the academy, and I did meet a person from DTRA, who was working for the FBI, who said that's how she got in.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that was the way, and it was through weapons of mass destruction. That was the unit of the counterintelligence group of the FBI that brought people in.
Okay.
And I very much believe, now I'm not saying the same exact people, but the people who use these bioweapons for elites, for basically spraying corridors for their railroads and their pipelines and their mines and subduing populations and locking down populations, that group, okay, that did Libya and anthrax in Libya and did sarin gas and chlorine gas in Syria, and then Yemen and Sudan and all these other places. And plus, there was probably a huge store of these weapons in the Iran nuclear deal as well. That group, the Peter Strzok group, the counterintelligence group, ran this operation, this counterintelligence operation. And they brought in the clandestine service. They brought in these Navy reservists. We now know this is going to be fun tomorrow when the Trump folks get to respond, because this guy from the Oath Keepers is an FBI informant. And since 2009, he ran the whole FBI division that recruited all the informants. We got another guy who's been an FBI informant, Terrio from the Proud Boys, since 2012.
Mm-hmm.
My defense would be, Mr. Jamie Raskin, can you show me someone who is not an FBI informant of the people we've identified? Can you show me just one?
Now, Andy, could you just scroll through that DTRA document so the audience knows that this is an entity, just to give you a graphic illustration of its existence? And they indeed might. This is a lead that's worth following up. This is their in-house publication for their employees. But yeah, this is the director at the time. And there's another one that lays out the whole flow chart. It has the Venn diagrams, the flow charts, the timelines that talks about the charge of the DTR. And I also have an entire book, a monograph of the history of the DTRA. See, this is an entity that's new to me, George, that you introduced me to. And I think it's a really important one to study, to look at.
They're based in Fort Belvoir. This is what, when Task Force and I were going up to Fort Detrick and Dragon Distillery, was Dragon Distillery really a Dragon Distillery? Were they making bioweapons for China, to clear the corridors from Belt and Road? We don't know. Task Force certainly felt that way. I thought, no, let's get back to the uranium. Let's go back, to Ohio. And she's saying, no, everybody here's Farsi speaking. Everybody here's Farsi speaking. There's only one Russian here. Sure, there was four Russian CEOs that were all four CEOs that were all convicted of espionage with the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
The new player here is Iran. This is Peter Strzok. This is Lisa Page speaking Farsi. The trucks aren't going as much to Columbus, the DTRA trucks. They're going to Fort Detrick.
Mm-hmm. I also have 4 volumes of, because you mentioned the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, George.
Yep.
HEAP. Okay, and then your argument is that these are not just training operations; these are preparation, or it's a misnomer. It's not exercise. It's a practice, really. Mm-hmm. It's a scrimmage for the big game on San Jose.
Yeah.
And so I have these documents, and it's a real entity. It's Tom Ridge's name is on it as secretary, and it comes under the auspices. There's the flow chart that the great producer Andy Dybala has put up there. So it's all there in black and white and color, ladies and gentlemen. This is it's a thing, okay? It's a big thing, because we usually think of the usual suspects, CIA and FBI and all the other alphabet, ONI maybe. But this seems to me like in recent times, at least, this is the granddaddy right here, HEAP.
Well, and this group used bioweapons and chemical weapons operationally in Libya, Syria, Sudan, Yemen, and maybe a part of the Iran deal as well. If you look at the people that are involved, all these same people are repurposed against Trump to do surveillance in the Trump campaign. George Papadopoulos negotiated the Iran deal. Carter Page was the weapons officer for Christopher Stevens, going all the way back to Egypt and the use of Muslim Brotherhood using these weapons. So, it's really, if you read this document, it's all about what you saw at the Capitol on the 6th. You have different people that are citing people, inciting them, and working them up. There's other people directing people where to go. There's other people who've like got, all of a sudden they've got speakers and bullhorns as commanders, just self-appointed commanders. Didn't happen by accident. We took all these interviews showing all these things. There's other people that act like they've been horribly hurt to make you angry. So it's very sophisticated.
And it's all there. It's a matter of public record. And once you do your compound searches, you will be amazed at what's out there for us to really figure out the larger grid in which they're working. And I whoever's defending President Trump, and personally, I think he should have gone pro se. He should have defended himself. But they should use these as exhibits to say this is really where it's coming from. It's not coming from President Donald J. Trump. It's coming from these entities that were created in the panic of the 9/11 event, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, which is it's a misnomer if there ever was one.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought the initial opening defense for this dismissal was some of the most boring legalese that you could ever imagine. And that's why I did my opening. I did my lawyerly opening for Twitter in less than 2 minutes. I said, look, Chuck Schumer said, no, Donald Trump's so heinous, he does not deserve due process. You know who got 11 years of due process in the worst decision ever by the Supreme Court? Dred Scott. Even a slave got 11 years of due process. And the Senate Majority Leader is now saying that the duly elected president of the United States doesn't even deserve the same due process as a slave in the worst decision ever by the Supreme Court. That's why John Roberts is not presiding over this kangaroo court. I think even kangaroos would call this a kangaroo court and not want to be a part of it. You'd have to have ferrets or something, you'd have to have some of the Erasmus Lab ferrets that have been genetically modified, because even kangaroos wouldn't sit for this.
Yeah, we're being marsupialed. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is that a new verb?
It is. Yeah.
I guess
we have to invent new terminology to deal with these strange, bizarre, recombinant, bioengineered realities here. So we have to develop a new conceptual vocabulary.
Well,
before the show's over, I want to ask Andy quickly, would you please offer Tyrone a wrench? We've been needing a wrench tonight, and he said he would do it. I think he said he'd do it. So I can't do it from here. So if you would just do that. So we have him on board for the future. Gosh, our hours run out, guys. This is terrible. I was just coming up with my first good question, and well, you guys are way ahead of me tonight, but I appreciate it, because George, what you're doing, this idea that tomorrow, now I've got some hope to go to bed with. I can think, yeah, maybe tomorrow, the thing's people are finally going to see what's going on. God, I mean, I don't know what to say except for I'm so frustrated. Our message has got to get out. It's got to get out. And Professor Hamamoto, thank you so much for being here and all the work you've been doing. It's a great thrill for me just to sit here and listen to you guys. And I don't know, maybe sometime we should expand the show a little bit, go more than an hour. But I think we'll wrap it up tonight at 9.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah. Thank you, George, and thank you, Team W, for presenting the evidence that will save the American Republic. We are forever in your debt. We're very grateful. Thanks, George.
Well, likewise to you guys. And I would just say, here's your brain teaser for next week. Come back with the homework answer. If AE, the 2-letter thing, is for Russian defectors, what does GP mean in the CIA cryptonym? And I'll give you the one example. GP4 was Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
I'm baffled.